The bell tolled, and they fastened shame to a cotton dress. They did it at Sunday noon, when light from the church windows ran like a river and everyone watched it flow. Someone printed Unfit on a card, neat as ledger script, and pinned it above the collar she had mended twice. Needle scars marked Eliza Hart's fingers, fresh, honest marks the town mistook for weakness. She stood straight. That did not mean she wasn't shaking. The preacher cleared his throat to soften things. Boys snickered, women divided into sweet mouths and sharp eyes. A clerk from the mercantile whispered that the county didn't need more hands that couldn't churn or birth or keep quiet. The word on her dress did the talking for them. At the back, a tall cattleman stepped out of the shade. He moved with the economy of a man who had hauled his own weight. Dust clung to his hat, and the way he looked at Eliza was not the way men look at bargains. It was closer to the way a dry country looks at rain. "Enough," he said. It wasn't loud, only final. He reached the front unhurried. People stepped aside. Some men carry a boundary. He took the card between two fingers, read it once, and the corner of his mouth hardened. "This is a lie," he said. "I won't let it stand." "Brother," the preacher said, "we're only sorting for fit." "Fit for what?" His eyes swept the pews. "Gossip, busybodies? I'll tell you what fits. A day's work, a square meal, and a bed where a soul can close her eyes without fear. I can offer those." Eliza's hands were still, but the pulse at her throat fluttered. She had been tied to a bad dock, bumping against spite with every ripple, and here came a clean line. "What name?" Someone called, half jeer, half curious. "Caleb Stone," he said. "I run cattle north. I need gear mended and men in proper coats before the weather turns mean. I've a spare cabin, tight and dry. She'll have her own key. I pay fair." Laughter tried to rise but couldn't clear his throat. There are men whose silence is offense. You don't lean on it long. Eliza looked at the doorway, at the card, at the floor. Arithmetic ran in her eyes. Food against pride, roof against risk, the long road against the town already decided. "I can sew weather smart," she said. "Canvas that sheds. Wool bound so it doesn't sting the neck. I can mend a ledger if the numbers bleed." Caleb nodded once. "Then we're agreed." The preacher tried again, not unkindly, only small in a larger moment. "We've had reports. The lady's history." Caleb folded the card until the crease bit his thumb. "History doesn't milk a cow. A person is what they do next." Air seemed to return to the room. Eliza was not saved by a knight. She was offered a door. Pride could walk through a door without kneeling. She touched the fray at her sleeve and squared to the aisle. Outside, noon smelled of river mud and sun-baked pine. Cottonwoods clapped their leaves like small hands. Wagons rattled. The town looked away because people don't like to face their meanness. Caleb didn't touch her. He matched her stride. 3 miles north," he said. "We'll stop at the mercantile. Needles, sailcloth, oilskin." "I know storms," she said, and didn't mean sky. He tipped his hat to that. The right distance is a courtesy decent folks keep until invited otherwise. At the counter, the clerk tried to be clever and found nothing clever with Caleb standing there. Needles, spools, beeswax, thread, canvas, laid like a kit of purpose. Caleb paid in coin. Change could be counted without comments. On the step, Eliza waited while he brought the wagon. The street ran dusty. A child with molasses on her face waved as if salvation were an ordinary cart that stopped sometimes. Eliza waved back and surprised herself to find she could. When he drew up, he set the brake and looked at her from the bench. "In my country," he said, "we write our evaluations with the work we finish and the stock we save. If you're willing, Miss Hart, you'll be judged on that and that alone." She climbed up, careful of her skirt. The bench was worn smooth by distance. She sat apart and felt steadier than in a year. Truths a plainsman learns early. Talk blows away. Wind tells on a person. The wind had not yet risen, but somewhere north a sky was already thinking about stones of ice. They rode. The town fell behind like a bad chapter you finish, and the prairie opened ahead, clean as a ledger page waiting for figures that could prove out. Dust climbed the spokes like it meant to ride along. When the wagon left the main track, Caleb's place lay quiet. A long, low house with a porch for weather. A cook shack, squared corrals, and under 2 ash trees. A spare cabin. Caleb set the brake. "You'll want a lock," he said. "Door's got one. This key's yours." Iron flashed, then clicked into her palm. Table, bed, pegs, a stove that draws if you treat it decently. Lamp oil by the step. Eliza liked the key's small weight. The cabin smelled of scrubbed boards. She set her bundle down and tested the table. Honest. Work first, he said. Supper after. They crossed to the tack shed where tools hung like a grammar. Saddles slept on racks, bridles coiled, a roll of canvas waited, and on the bench a ledger lay with numbers walking in circles. My men are wearing the weather wrong, Caleb said. Canvas cracks, cuffs drink water, collars chew. Hale took 2 calves last thaw. More coming. I need slickers that swear off wind, ponchos tight as a drum, mittens bound where rope eats.
Can you cut to fit from the sign to the saddle?
I can, Eliza said. She touched a frayed seam. And I can make this book speak plain. A rangy man took the doorway. Jess Tully, he said. Foreman, cook is May, Caleb said. May answers to hunger and scripture. Jess tipped his hat. Keep rain off my boys and I'll keep your woodpile taller than you. Wood and water first, Eliza said. Then thread. She sorted. Mend now, mend soon, past mercy. From her bundle she took a tin, needles, beeswax, thimble worn to her shape. Hands beat a steady time. Her mind grew still. What do you need? Caleb asked. Oilskin if you've got it. Linseed if you don't. A pot that won't mind turning ugly. Sailcloth for backs, wool for throats. A line to hang. You've all that. Take the ash yard. Jess, string a line. Jess moved. A boy trotted in with scrap leather and tried to look careless about caring. Nate, he said and flushed. Thank you, Nate, Eliza said, and his back found an inch of height. May called from the cook shack door, towel on one hip. Bell rings once for supper, twice for sinners who are late. I keep good time, Eliza answered. Water heated. Beeswax sang along the thread. Buttons went back with cross stitches that would not quit. She marked patterns with soap and cut where chalk would not betray her. The yard became a shop. Caleb returned with linseed and a scuffed kettle. Storm sign in the west, he said. The next 3 days decide the month. Then we're ready in 2, she said. The hands rode in at dusk, dust-necked and good-tired. They measured the stranger and found no purchase for meanness. Eliza fitted 2 sleeves, checked a collar, and sent Nate off with a note. Boil, oil, hang, repeat. May's bell set spoons to answering. Inside beans, skillet bread, and coffee stout. Eliza took a place by the wall. Caleb sat where questions could find him. After, Caleb walked her to the cabin. The ash leaves sounded like small rain, though the sky was clear. He stopped at the step. Rules, he said. Your door's your door. Any man crosses without your say, he meets me first. If I err on the side of protection. I speak short because words run dear. Pay Saturday. If something's broke, tell me. If you can fix it faster, fix it and tell me after. Eliza weighed him in the old habit. He balanced. My rules, she said. I work clean. I leave histories alone until folks lay them on the table. I need first light and last light, stock by sundown, quiet when the needle asks. Done. Then we're partners in the work. He nodded. Alone, she lit the lamp. From her bundle, she took the church's card and set it under the chimney. Heat curled it into a question. The letters faltered. A wind came down from the high country, cool as river stone. The key on the table gleamed the way small. Right things do. Before lying down, she walked the yard, counting without numbers. Canvas for 8 slickers if cut tight. Wool for 6 collars and 4 scarves. Buttons short by a dozen. She penciled a list and tucked it by the door. In the last inch of waking, she heard Caleb step off his porch and listen to a sky only he could read. Stakes were set. Weather was taking notes. Morning would bring measuring, boiling, oiling, rhythm married to purpose and the promise of men riding out warm. Beyond the blue edge, hailstones waited their turn. Eliza Hart closed her eyes and the day made ready inside her. The kettle clicked once like a trigger deciding. Eliza was up before the ash leaves showed any shine. She fed the stove, set water to boil, and stepped out with her list. In the pail, the yard belonged to birds and men who kept their word to the morning. Caleb had already saddled a dun and was checking a gate by lantern. He looked toward her as if daylight were reporting in. Coffee'll be thick in 5, May called from the cook shack, as sure as sunrise. Eliza strung a second line between the ash trees. The oilskin hung dark as river rock, shedding what dew dared try it. She pressed a seam with the back of her thumbnail. The waxed thread lay smooth, obedient. When a thing is done right, it stops arguing. Nate came trotting, hair not yet remembering a comb. He had the proud awkwardness of a boy useful for the first time. Those sleeves you fitted yesterday, Jess says they don't bite the wrist. They won't, Eliza said. Show me your hands. He held them out. Rope gloss, a young man's brag and hazard. She cut 2 thumb guards from scrap, lined them in wool, and stitched them fast. For your roping glove, she said. Keeps the burn from the first slip. Nate flexed, trying not to grin too wide. Yes, ma'am, small gifts sell big truths. Men remember when a stranger thinks ahead for them. Caleb came from the corral. Dust along his cuffs like a map of work done. He set a narrow parcel on her table. Was going to rig you a thimble guard, he said, almost apologizing for thinking of it. May beat me to leather. I whittled the block instead. Inside lay a palm-sized cobbler's last he'd carved from ash, smooth where fingers would press. For shaping cuffs, he said. Your knuckles looked bloodied yesterday. Eliza weighed it, the wood warm from his pocket. It'll earn its keep. He nodded, which with him passed for a smile. Respect, traded without ceremony, is a good start at peace. By full light she had patterns chalked, sleeves trued, collars bound in wool. Jess brought a bridle that ate cheeks raw and stood impatient until she flipped the bit, widened the cheek piece and set a lamb's wool lining under the crown. Don't fight a horse at the head, she said. Make it not hurt to be good. Jess touched his hat brim. You got a way of talking that saves steps. They tested the oiling, boiled coat, brushed mix, hung to cure, repeated. The canvas drank and darkened the sensible color of storms. Nate churned linseed with an old stick while May's bell called a break. At the long table, bowls went down and talk rode around them. Eliza kept her place by the wall, listening. Men reckon a new fact 3 times. Once against their pride, once against their habits, and once against the truth they already knew. By the 3rd pass, eyes on her had mostly lost their measuring. After the plates, Caleb set the ledger by her elbow. You said you could make it speak plain. She turned pages, neat brows tightening where numbers had wandered. You pay a man on time he remembers to show, she said. But if the columns lie to you, you end up paying for ghosts. Someone's counting calves twice between Drift and Sweetwater. Tallies on wet days don't match the dry. Jess swore softly. Thought I was going crazy. Crazy is a luxury for people who can miss meals, Eliza said. This is an error and habit, both curable. She sharpened a pencil with a paring knife and set to work. Caleb watched the clean march of figures, the way a broken tune can be made right by a steady hand. Midday pulled men back outside. Fence wire sang faintly. Wind shifted. On the south pasture, Nate tried to heave a green post by himself and learned something the hard way. The post skidded. Barbed wire whipped, found Jess's forearm, and printed its lesson deep. Hold. Eliza's voice cut through the noise like a bell meant for thinking. Jess had the sense to freeze. She reached for the water pail, sloshed clean over the wound until the red ran thin, then looked to May. Whiskey, boiled cloth, your cleanest needle, she said. If there's carbolic in the house, I want a finger's worth. May didn't argue. She returned with a bottle, a kettle puffing, a little brown bottle saved from a peddler's case and thread that hadn't yet seen dirt. Eliza boiled the needle, threaded it while the steam kissed her knuckles, then wiped the skin with a rag wet in whiskey and a breath of carbolic. Jess faced the fence like a man on the far end of a stubborn talk. You mean to sew me like a torn cinch? I mean to close what must close, she said. Barb cuts don't forgive sloppiness. Breathe here. She stitched quickly. Sure, the bites need a saddle work. 2 knots buried, ends trimmed. She buttered the line with salve May had for burns, set a clean bandage and tied it where a tug wouldn't slip. You'll keep it dry, you'll keep it high, and you'll keep it still until I say otherwise, she said. You'll favor it without turning lazy. If fever looks your way, we'll argue it off. Jess studied the work with a grim curiosity that turned, by inches, to respect. You've done this before. I've had to, Eliza said. Thread is thread, whether a coat leaks or a man does. Caleb's eyes met hers, steady. He wasn't surprised. He was adding information to the column that already read, useful, quiet, worth backing. The wind blew another degree north. Swallows flew low like truth that didn't care for speeches. Eliza looked up at the sky as if she could count its thoughts. Hail's closer, she said. We'll want the calves hooded. Caleb cocked an eyebrow. I can cut bonnets from offcuts, she said. Triangular hoods that tie under the jaw and shield the skull. Not pretty. Practical. If stones fall, they won't break the soft heads. Draw it, Caleb said. She chalked on canvas, Triangle, darts, slits, ties, then cut and stitched the first. Nate held while she measured, his face solemn. They rigged one on a sawhorse to test the tie angle. Jess, pale and stubborn, used his good hand to help tighten and nodded when the knot sat where it should. "Make a dozen to start," Caleb said. "We'll work the first string calves under cover if we can." If we can't, they'll at least have hats," Eliza said, and a corner of May's mouth gave up a smile. Afternoon stretched taut. Oil-soaked, seams cured, bonnets multiplied. The yard smelled of linseed, wet wool, and a storm that had written its intention and was bringing it to be. Men stopped talking and gave the same answer. As the sun leaned west, Caleb stepped to the ash shade and watched Eliza's needle moving. "You built us an edge we didn't have yesterday," he said. "Edges are just choices stacked close," she answered, not looking up. "We'll need them stacked taller by dawn." Beyond the fence, thunder grumbled like a man who didn't plan to repeat himself. The horizon rolled its shoulders like a man meaning trouble. By noon, the wind had a burr. Posts thrummed. Gates talked. Eliza read the place like a weather map in metal and wood. She sent Nate for twine, told Jess to keep his bandage high, and cut triangles until canvas scraps freckled the table. Bonnet ties coiled in piles. The oil pot ticked its own hard logic. Caleb rode the fence in looping checks that tightened the spread like a cinch. Each pass, he dropped something at her elbow. Rawhide lace, a sack of buttons, a coil of waxed thread. "Storm shelf showing teeth," he said on the third pass. "First calves to the south lot. If it breaks meaner, we shove to the cut bank. Then the bonnets lead," Eliza said. "Nate, fetch soft rope. We won't burn jaws doing right." They trialed a yearling patient enough. 2 darts, a slit for the ear, ties under the jaw and behind the pole. The canvas sat snug, ridiculous and life-saving both. Nate laughed once, then swallowed it when thunder walked closer. May set out noon plates. "Eat while chewing's friendly," she said. "Supper may be a drink with crumbs." They ate moving. After, Eliza took the ledger to the porch where the light was clean. She squared it and taught it not to lie. Columns straightened. Double calves vanished. Rain days fell into place. She penciled. Subtract wet tally phantom Sweetwater drift week 9. Jess came quietly, watching. "I follow the water," Eliza said. "On wet days a man tallies wrong. I weigh dry for count, wet for loss, then average to keep the truth," Jess whistled. "You've saved us a month of wondering." "It saves calves we haven't met," she said. Caleb came when the last page lay honest. Jaw eased as numbers began to trust themselves. "You paid your keep twice," he said. "I'll collect in peace of mind." The wind fell out for a minute. Eliza set a scarf she'd finished on the rail, wool bound in soft leather the color of riverstone. "For a man who reads the sky before it decides," she said. Caleb tried it on like a man unused to gifts without strings. "It sits right," he said. Work took the hour back. Jess staged bonnets at the corrals. Nate stuffed burlap with straw to shield the low fence. At 4, the light went sallow. Swallows cut low. The ash leaves showed their pale undersides. "Time," Caleb said. They moved deliberately as men in a tight canyon. Calves pressed noses to mothers and bawled. Slickers streamed like riverweed. Eliza tied, checked, hands quick, mind steady. When a knot slid, she flipped it, mule ear to square, and taught Nate why some knots obey purpose. Hale rode the first gust like scouts. Small, hard testing. Then came the company. Stones rattled roofs, pinged off buckets, and peppered the yard until the air seemed armored. Caleb's call cut through. "South lot. Keep corners empty." And Jess echoed him. A calf lost its bonnet under a hard slam. Eliza was there before the second strike, shoulder to flank, body a windbreak, Nate bracing the other side. "Under the jaw," she said, "retie, snug, thumb test, release." The calf blinked and breathed. They moved to the next and the next. The storm marched east and doubled back mean. Coats took the beating meant for bone. The ash trees threw hail. The cabin windows held. May's hymn, half tune, half prayer, threaded the noise. Minutes dragged, then broke. Hail thinned to rain, steady, forgiving. Heads lifted. Horses shook. Someone laughed because surviving invites it. They walked the pens. Bonnets sat where they ought. Ears flicked under canvas peaks. Calves counted whole. The straw sacks at the fence had taken the worst of the side hits. Jess checked his stitches, dry and clean. Nate stood taller than at breakfast. Caleb wrung the scarf and hung it on a peg. He faced the crew. "Good hands," he said. 2 words, full pay. He turned to Eliza. You turned panic into a plan. I won't forget who drew that map. Maps are where you put them, she said. Evening drained the color and left the world. May banged her spoon and called it supper. Steam made a welcome. They ate. No speeches. The work had spoken. When the plates cleared, Eliza shelved the ledger. On impulse, she set the ruined church card beside it, letters half ghosted by heat, and left it like a witness that doubted itself. Outside, the storm muttered beyond the cut bank. Tomorrow would be repairs and account. Losses in single digits instead of dozens. A place can live on numbers like that. Caleb paused with her on the porch. Rain tapped the steps. We keep at it, he said. We keep at it, she answered, as if they'd agreed on more than weather. The lantern burned like a small promise that was meant to be kept. Rain slid from the eaves in threads, and the ranch breathed the way a man breathes when a fist unclenches. May stacked plates. Jess mocked his bandage to keep it brave, and Nate told the same piece twice to learn it true. Caleb went out to look the sky in the eye. Eliza rinsed the needles, dried them on a rag. Losses? She asked when he came back. 3 calves down, 1 cow lame, a gate sprung. Men whole. That's the count that matters. They walked the pens with a lantern, checking ties and tempers. Canvas bonnets bobbed like foolish little tents, and foolishness saved lives. When the light found a calf sleeping deep, Eliza put 2 fingers to its neck and felt a rhythm that would keep. Caleb tilted the flame. You made a tool we didn't think to ask for. I saw where the hitting would land and moved between, she said. A seamstress learns not to wait for a tear to be polite. He let a smile go. Good counsel in leather and life. At the cabin, ash leaves flicked water like horses. Caleb studied the door. Your hinge squeaks. I'll fix that before it tells the whole yard you're coming and going. You can oil it, she said. I'll boil the kettle. He fetched a can and a rag. She set water on and laid out supper. Bread, cheese, and an apple tasting of October. He worked the pin, fed oil into the joint, opened and shut till silence. You eat here, he said. I do. I'll hang a hook outside for your kettle and a shelf for your tins. Reaching shouldn't cost daylight. And a man who notices that saves everyone's steps. They shared the bread without speech. He didn't take the chair until she sat. He didn't talk until she'd had the first bite. Respect like a fence is better seen than discussed. Where'd you learn the ledger? He asked. Smithfield Mill, she said. We got coin when someone honest carried the numbers. When the honest one left to marry, the foreman paid in promises. I learned to add so we could eat. You left after? I left when staying made me small enough to fit another man's pocket. He grunted. With him, it meant approval salted with sorrow. Out here, the math is simple. Cattle, water, grass, winter. A man can still lie to himself with neat sums. Then we agree to check each other. We do. Silence followed. The good kind. Eliza stitched a leather keeper to the scarf she'd bound for him. He watched with the attention of a man who'd seen work turn into safety too many times to call it ordinary. May knocked, 2 brisk raps, and shouldered in with a tin. Pie shocked to be so early in the week, she said. We owe that storm a dessert for missing our heads. Come in, Eliza said, laughing more easily than yesterday. May sniffed the hinge. Tamed it good. Gossip needs one less excuse. She measured kindness and distance with a practiced eye. You both remember to sleep sometime before cockcrow? We will, Caleb said. Decent will do, May answered and left her warmth like steam. Caleb took his hat from the peg. Need anything else tonight? I need to stand by my own fire and remember there is one. He tipped the brim. I'll set the hook in the morning. He paused, careful with words as with footholds. Good work, Miss Hart. Good work, Mr. Stone. He went into the rain, shoulders squaring by habit into darkness. Her breathing found a steadier gait. Alone, she cleaned until the room set her name back. She folded the bonnet patterns, future insurance, sharpened her pencil, and left it with the ledger open to honest columns. The church card lay beside it, edges curled. She touched the word they'd pinned and felt it flinch. She held her hands to the lamp. Needle marks, burn gloss, and little nicks a life gives when it refuses to lie down. A person is what they do next, she said into the quiet, making it a vow. She banked the stove and lay down. The roof ticked, content. Wind shifted north. Somewhere a steer blew once, surprised to be warm. She smiled without showing teeth. Tomorrow means mending and counting, and then if the road holds, a ride into town for buttons enough to arm a regiment. May had let slip there'd be a harvest dance before the month's end. A public place has ways of measuring a soul. A ledger never will. Eliza did not fear a scale when she knew the weights. She slept as a woman sleeps who has earned rest by the inch and intends to keep it. The sun lifted like a coin a ranch could spend. By daybreak, the sky wore washed blue and the place counted itself sound. Eliza stepped to the ash shade with her list rolled like a cartridge. Caleb let out 2 mounts, the dun for him, a mannerly bay for her. Town and back before sundown, he said. Buttons. Needles oil, she answered. May packed bread, jerky, 2 apples and coffee. Jess waved his good hand and asked for nails or gossip, whichever weighed less. Nate promised to keep the bonnet patterns safe and the calves counted. They took the section road. Grass bowed and lifted. Eliza rode lightly, following the horse the way a seam follows a true line. Caleb set the kind of pace that doesn't break a mounter a day. You ride square, he said. I was told to sit like I meant to stay. Town lay quiet on its flat. The church bright as a tooth, awnings striped over Webb's mercantile. A harvest banner waited for wind and fiddles. I'll walk in on my own feet, she said. You won't walk alone, he said. They tied off at the rail. Webb's clerk measured them with last week's eyes and then measured again. Eliza set her list and coin on the counter where a man could count without speeches. Sailcloth, oilskin, stout thread, horn buttons, 3 dozen if you have them, 6 yards of rain-honest wool, ledger paper, and a pencil that doesn't quit, she said. 2 dozen buttons, the clerk said. Freight's late. Then 2 dozen. 2 women drifted near, opinions riding ahead of them. One wore silk, tired of being good. The other wore righteousness like armor. You from the church placement? The righteous one asked. I'm from myself, Eliza said. I work for Mr. Stone, the silk-eyed Caleb. Picking up strays now, Stone? I'm hiring skill, he said. The church holds a dance tonight, righteousness added. Standards apply. A waltz keeps the same beat whether a dress is new or mended, Eliza said. We'll be there, Caleb told the clerk, who wasn't the one asking. Outside, they loaded bundles. Eliza counted aloud, not from doubt, but because names laid on goods keep them loyal. They ate under the awning. A boy hawked handbills. Dance at 7. Pie auction. Who bakes the dangerous pies? Caleb asked. Miss Tansy's lemon, the boy grinned. Maystone's berry starts fights and ends them. They turned the square, blacksmith, post, freight. She set distances in her head like seam allowance. Toward evening, they rode back to wash trail dust, stowed the goods, and returned as lanterns bloomed. Music climbed the church steps before their boots did. Inside, lamplight lay gold over faces, rough coats, and Sunday dresses with brave mended hems. Eliza kept to the edge until Caleb offered his arm without a word. She'd have to dodge. She took it. They crossed the floor like 2 people who had done the hard thing outdoors and were willing to do the easy thing under a roof. The first tune was a reel that forgave errors. Caleb moved with spare economy. No showing off, no stepping, he couldn't back. Eliza followed because rhythm trusts a clear lead. By the second turn, eyes that had been knives looked down and became ordinary spoons. At the pause, the preacher cleared his throat. He took their measure and found it respectable. Neighbors, he said, the hail came hard and left us standing. Let's be as generous as the Lord was stern. Warm talk rose. Plates marched. Caleb bent close enough to be heard and no closer. You carry yourself like a woman with a key. I carry a key, she said. The trick is remembering what it opens. He looked at her hand, then at her face as if agreeing to be the door that didn't slam. The fiddles found a waltz. He asked without asking. She nodded. They turned slowly on a floor that judged fair for once. On the far wall, the silk watched, interested. Righteousness watched, unsatisfied. May came with pie, saw Eliza's step and smiled into her apron. Pie auction. Someone bawled. Men grew foolish the way men do when sweetness and pride share a plate. Caleb bought 2 slices and set one in Eliza's hand like a treat. Between tunes, the door banged. A man with new boots and old malice stood in lamp smoke, the kind who reads another's gain as his loss. He let the room meet his stare and waited to be the center. Caleb didn't move more than a breath. Eliza didn't either. The fiddles lifted and the town survived by keeping the beat. Caleb offered his arm once more. Eliza took it. They stepped back into the turn, steady as figures that finally add. The night held steady. Trouble showed up wearing spurs that hadn't earned their jingle. Morning put a clean shine on the yard, but it didn't change men. By 9, a buggy rolled in with the preacher, Webb from the mercantile. and a fellow in new boots who wore his hat like ownership. Caleb met them at the rail. Eliza stood under the ash with her needle tin. "Mr. Stone," the preacher said, "we bring a petition." Webb unfolded the paper. The new boot fellow tipped his brim. "Vern Pike, South Outfit. I like order." "Read," Caleb said. The preacher did. It said a woman of uncertain past ought not dwell among hired men. That decency required her return to church oversight. That commerce suffered when standards slipped. That the dance offended persons unnamed. Eliza watched the words crowd together to look large. Caleb heard them out and dusted silence. "My hands ate in peace and rode home honest," he said. "Miss Hart has her own door and key. We've weathered enough without borrowing fear." Pike smiled like a man measuring a fence he means to cut. "Law favors quiet neighbors. That South Water of yours sits on a county lease." "Leases favor paid notes and clean books," Eliza said. "We keep both." Pike glanced, surprised she could answer. "You talk ledger?" "I talk truth that adds." "We'll let the petition make its rounds," he said. Meeting at sundown. They left trailing paper and pride. Caleb watched because cowmen track all weather. Work resumed. Eliza carried towels to the line and heard the yard's music wrong. The south trough lacked its usual laugh. She walked that way. At the cut bank, the creek gate was wedged shut by a rock shaped for the job. The chain wore fresh file marks where a break would hide. Let the troughs run dry, let cattle crowd fence, let stone look feckless at sundown. There was the plan. She freed the gate. Water hurried like news returning to truth. On the bank, a curl of new black leather lay with a faint factory stamp, and a boot sign showed square heels with 2 little star tacks near the edge. Eliza pocketed the curl and brushed the sign with willow to make the next attempt work harder. Back at the tack shed, the ledger lay nudged. One page hummed wrong. Someone had copied her neat columns and slid the forgery in to fool the wrong eyes. Ghost calves again, Jess saw her face. "Bad? Clumsy," she said. "Enough for a committee to pretend it believes." Caleb came in and waited. She set the chain file dust and leather curl on the bench. "They want the south strip. Dry the troughs, make the books lie, call you careless, pull the lease, hand it to the loudest neighbor. Maybe one wearing new leather." Caleb turned the curl and set it down like a laid plan. "Thank you. We top every trough before noon," she said, "and pen calves where fence doubles. Then we attend your meeting carrying the smell of water, not dust." "That's the work," he said. "Jess, Nate, fill and overfill. Mip back omlim. Eliza, keep the true page separate." She nodded from the doorway, tying a basket. Jess grinned. Nate squared his shoulders. They moved quickly without hurrying. Troughs brimmed. Gates got double chain. The wagon waited with barrels. By mid-afternoon, Pike rode the ridge with 2 men, studying. He saw cattle dozing instead of milling and did not wave. From the ash shade, Eliza marked a fact. His left spur chimed dull, the right bright. A man who drags 1 foot leaves a sign a blind sheriff could follow. Caleb stood on the porch, hat tipped. "They'll talk till talk fails, then they'll use night. Then we'll arrive early to the talk and earlier to the night," Eliza said. He looked at her and something in him eased. "If they sell bravery by the yard, I'll buy what you're wearing." "Stitch by stitch," she said. "That's how it's made." They rode at 5. The church porch drew folks like a fire draws moths. Paper passed. The preacher held his hat and his piece. Webb studied his shoes. Pike leaned in the lamplight. Caleb and Eliza stepped up. He glanced at the petition, then at the faces. "Before you vote a neighbor poor," he said, "come see our water running and our count straight." Pike smiled, teeth only. "We'll hear all that, Stone. Then the town will decide what's fit." Eliza stood steady at Caleb's shoulder. Fit was a word that had misplaced its mirror. She meant to hand it back. A wind shifted. Lanterns tilted. Decisions like storms have a smell before they break. From the darker end of the porch came the scrape of a boot with a dull chime, and Eliza knew Night was already stepping off the stairs. Night carried knives under its coat. The meeting dissolved into mutters and hat-brim math. No vote yet, just paper passed hand to hand like a sickness that wanted air. Caleb kept his jaw easy. Eliza kept her eyes on the door and the boots that passed through it. 1 pair chimed dull on the right, bright on the left. She filed the tune. They rode home without talk, the kind of quiet that saves breath for what's next. At the ash shade, Caleb swung down and checked the yard by habit. Latched gates, watered troughs, lamp turned low in May's window. He looked toward Eliza's door and paused as if the hinge had a story. "I'll walk the south fence," he said. "I'll set the kettle," she answered. When his steps faded, she went inside and opened the box where she kept her small life. Patterns folded clean. The tin of needles, the cobbler's last he'd carved. The ledger page she had kept separate. She laid the key next to the lamp and set a note under it with the weight of a thimble. "Caleb, they mean to harm you through me. I won't be the handle they use. Thank you for the work in the roof. Guard the south water." Her hands were steady and not. Leaving is a skill you never wish to need twice. She wrapped her shawl and lifted the latch. The yard had a strange stillness, the kind you find before a thing breaks. From the tack shed came a scrape not made by mice, and from the south a chain whispered wrong. Eliza put the shawl back, took up the ashwood last, and moved toward the shed with a step taught by narrow stairs and bad mill corridors. She eased the door. A man's back hunched over the oil tins, lantern tipped. New leather caught a bit of flame, the stamp she'd seen on the creek bank. On his heel, 2 small star-tacks winked like a poor man's idea of fancy. Clem, quiet hire of 2 weeks, turned his head. His left spur spoke dull. "You'll splash that shop into the sky," Eliza said, voice flat as a countertop. "Linseed burns cleaner than truth," he started, then grinned wrongly. "Pike pays for nudges. Ranches drift for lack of care. Nobody needs to be hurt. You brought your hurt with you." She stepped closer, the ash last hidden in her skirt. "Turn down the lantern." "Or what? You'll scold me straight?" She moved, the quick step of a woman who has learned where to be when men misjudge. The ash last cracked his wrist. The lantern fell, snuffed in a pan of water she had left from boiling thread. He cursed and lunged. She caught a fist on her shoulder and answered with the awl kept on a peg, a sharp kiss to his sleeve, enough sting to steady his choices. He jerked back, shocked she had teeth. "Chain at the south gates filed," she said, breath even. "Your work is seen." He spat toward the dark. "Then I'll make a bigger wind." He shouldered past, knocking her hard into the bench, and ran for the yard. Eliza hit the bell by May's door twice, hard. May's old joke made a warning. The sound cut the quiet clean. Doors jumped. Jess came one-armed, Nate behind him with a pitchfork he'd never meant to use that way. "South gate," Eliza called. "And wet blankets now." May threw a bucket to Jess and vanished to the pump. Nate took the blankets before panic could claim him. Eliza ran for the corral where the first cattle had begun that restless shift. Heads up, feet hunting. Beyond, in the dark, riders whooped once, low, trying to swell fear without writing their names. Caleb's voice came from the creek line, calm and carrying. "Hold your corners. Keep the middle thick, no gaps." He'd heard, seen, and started the counter before the first shove landed. "That's a cattleman's schooling." Clem hit the south latch. The field chain parted like wet thread. The panel swung. The lead steers nosed into the new space. Eliza met them with her body not foolish but firm, arms wide, shawl lifted, voice a steady river. "Back, boys, back." She wasn't big, but courage reads large to animals. Jess slid in and dropped a doubled chain through the slots. His bandaged arm close to the guard rope and cussing softly and usefully. A bottle arced from the dark and shattered against the hay rack. Linseed scent made wicked. Fire licked up like a fast learner. May's bucket hit true. Nate was smothered with a wet blanket, then another. Eliza took a spark on her palm and shook it off. Skin stung, smelled sharp. She didn't give it a mind. 2 riders pressed the fence, thinking to lift the boards with their weight. Caleb's rope hissed and found a wrist. A hard yank unhorsed a man into his own bad idea of a plan. He hit dirt and got up slow, not nearly as brave as when shadows hid his face. The other rider wheeled and caught a gatepost with his knee. Lesson delivered. Clem came at Eliza again. Knife out now because men who start small sometimes end foolishly. She stepped to the side and swung the ash last into his knuckles, bone on wood with a sound you don't forget. The knife spun into straw. Nate's pitchfork dropped across it before fear could get complicated. "Pick it up." "Boy, and you'll learn a different dance," Jess said, voice bone dry. Clem clutched his hand and looked toward the dark like it owed him help. The riders had stopped whooping. The cattle had stopped listening to fear and started listening to people they knew. Fire hissed into steam under May's blankets. The hayrack smoked and thought better of it. Caleb stepped into the lantern light with the rope loose and judgment tight. "You brought night to my yard," he said to Clem. "You get to leave by daylight in the sheriff's hand." Or you leave broken right now, decide. Clem's eyes flicked to Eliza. Tiny woman. Thimble marks, ash club in her fist, and something in him quit. He bolted for the fence. Caleb didn't chase. The creek and a long county would take the starch out of him before sunrise. The unhorsed rider limped after, minus his bravery and one spur that chimed bright as it bounced. Silence reassembled itself piece by piece. Cattle blew and settled. The south gate held. May set a hand on Eliza's burned palm and hissed, then kissed her teeth. Cold water, then salve, she ordered. Don't argue. Eliza didn't. May tended while Jess and Nate stamped the last sparks and shouldered the rack off its risky place. Caleb tied the doubled chain with a knot that didn't trust lies. He turned and looked at Eliza, not like a man grateful to be saved, not like a man surprised, but like a partner who had learned the exact measure of the person beside him. His eyes found the note she'd pinned under the lamp, seen now because May had propped the door. You were fixing to leave, he said. No accusation in it, only truth asked to stand up straight. I thought they'd use me to pull your house down, she said. I won't be a lever for another man again. Caleb reached past the note, lifted the bent church card from where she kept it like a witness, and weighed both in his hand. Night tried its say, he said. It didn't get the last word. Out beyond the fence, coyotes talked about other business. Dawn waited, sharpening its edge. Inside Eliza's palm, the burn throbbed, a small price, honestly counted. They would sit the hours left until light, and then do what morning requires. Dawn stepped over the ridge with its badge showing. They had slept in pieces and called it enough. Caleb came from the creek line with damp on his cuffs and a plan in his mouth. May poured coffee that kept a man awake. Jess flexed his bandage and kept his jaw quiet. Nate held the broken spur like a truth that wanted daylight. We go straight, Caleb said. Jess, ride to Sheriff Klein and bring him to the south lease gate. May, keep the boys steady and the yard wet. Nate, fetch the chain filings, the leather curl, and the forged ledger page. Eliza, bring the real page and the card they pinned at the church. If a town wants a show, we'll give it facts. Eliza wrapped her burned palm and tied her shawl tight. Facts travel better with witnesses, she said. They moved while the sun was still making up its mind. At the cut bank, Water spoke in a steady voice. Caleb stood where the chain showed fresh harm. Nate opened his palm to let the gray filings roll like grit. Eliza held out the leather curl with the faint factory stamp. The sheriff rode in slow. A man who let evidence speak first. What am I seeing? Klein asked. Night work with day consequences, Caleb said. Filed chain at my lease gate. An attempted fire by the hay rack. One hired man turned snake. 2 riders crossed my fence line to spook my herd. Klein's eyes shifted to Eliza. He'd watched her mending on the church steps and weighed the town's talk without liking it. You witnessed? I did more than that, she said. I cooled the lantern, met a knife with ashwood, and helped put the fear back where it came from. I also pulled this from the church forgery kit. She laid the copied ledger columns beside her true page. Count the calves. The false sheet doubles our wet day tally. Pike thinks drunk numbers pass for proof. Klein grunted. He preferred proof that kicked his boot. And that broken spur. Nate lifted it. 2 little star tacks winked. Found after a rider tried to lift our fence. Klein nodded once. We'll see whose boot limps. They didn't have to look long. Vern Pike rode in with his 2, late to his own lie. Clem hung a few yards back, hand-wrapped, face washed to look innocent. The second rider carried 1 bright spur and 1 ankle glaring from an empty strap. Morning, Sheriff, Pike said, friendly the way a snake is patterned. I hear there's trouble at Stone's, and I sure do hate trouble. Klein looked at the empty strap and then at Nate's palm. Lose something, Harlan? The man's mouth worked. The broken spur clinked into Klein's hand, and the sheriff's eyebrow climbed like a man stepping up to witness on the good side. And you, Clem? Show me your wrists. Clem showed bone welts where Ash had argued it. He tried a grin. It didn't stay. Klein turned to Pike. Your fellas do any filing in the dark? Got any ledger pages that breed calves by candlelight? Pike took offense like a man picks up a prop. Sheriff, I was petitioning for decency, not committing crimes. Miss Hart's presence riles a stable town. I'm minded to protect standards. Standards don't saw through a man's chain, Klein said. Save 'em for Sunday. Pike's jaw tipped. You'll regret siding with the loudest charity case in the county, Stone. That South Water sits close to the lines the county marks for me next spring. I play the long game. Caleb's hand went lax near his rope. It was the kind of illustration that ends a chapter. You play it poorly. Here's my counter. He pointed at the creek gate and the brimming troughs, then at the doubled chain Jess had set. He nodded to May's wet yard where smoke had not had its way. He listed them plain. Water running. Fire put out. Fence mended. Count true. Hands whole. That's what I brought to daylight. What did you bring? Pike looked to Klein and found no favor. The sheriff's palm opened for iron. Clem, you're under arrest for arson attempt and criminal mischief. Harlan, you're coming for trespass and damage. Pike, step carefully. Speak once more about leased water like it's yours, and I'll fetch papers that test your courage in town. Clem spat and thought better of finishing the gesture. Harlan offered his wrists like a man finally remembering how small he was. Klein bound them and sent a deputy to fetch the wagon from town. Pike's eyes flicked to Eliza, angry to see anyone stand steady. You, he said. You're the trouble. Put a ruffle on a mill rat and she thinks she's decent. Eliza met him with the kind of quiet that makes a man hear himself. Decency is what you do when no one's watching. We were watched all night and did fine. Pike turned his horse sharply and trotted for distance. Men with thin souls prefer space. The sun cleared and made a proper morning. Caleb breathed once deep, like a man putting down a weight he'd carried longer than he knew. He turned to Eliza and held out his hand. Bring that card, he said. She did. The letters were still mean and still small, unfit, shaking under the light. Caleb took a carpenter's pencil from his pocket, the kind that writes through dust, and marked one straight line through the poison word. He wrote above it in block letters that wouldn't fade in a wet wind, Beloved. He pinned the card to her dress the way men tack a notice that changes how land is used. His hands were sure and careful. Then he faced the sheriff because a public thing ought to be done fully public. Klein, he said, I'm declaring this woman my partner in the work, and my partner at home and in name. That town petition can blow away. My gate is my gate, my house is my house, and my word is my word. If the law requires a paper, I'll sign it before sundown. Silence took a step back to make room for something larger. May's apron came up to her eyes, then down with a brisk swipe. Jess smiled with half his face and all his heart. Nate looked like a colt taught to stand proud. Eliza touched the card where the new word lay like a brand that didn't burn. Her voice, when it came, was steady enough to build a house on. I'll take the name if you'll take the truth that comes with me. I work clean, I speak plain, and I don't run when the weather turns. I won't be kept. I'll be kept company. Caleb's mouth found the shape of a smile that would last. That's the only keeping I've got sense for. Klein nodded like a man who had just seen the point of a sermon. I'll have Pastor sign the paper at noon and we'll call it legal by supper time, he said. The town wanted a measure. It's got one. Wind lifted the ash leaves and set them clapping like small hands. The ranch, newly named in all the ways that mattered, stood up straighter. Far off, the ridge threw back the sun like it was pleased to be asked to the table. The anvil rang once, turning iron into promise. By noon, the pastor had his book open on the porch rail, and Sheriff Klein stood witness with May, Jess, and Nate. The ash leaves clapped lightly. Caleb set his hat straight and looked at Eliza as a man looks when he has already decided to spend his days paying attention. Name? The pastor asked. Caleb Stone, he said. Eliza Hart? She answered, and then after a breath that did not tremble, Eliza Hart Stone. Paper took ink. A line and a name can move mountains made of opinion. Klein signed. May added a bold curl. Jess set his left-handed mark. The pastor said words older than the county. Caleb slipped a band of braided rawhide over her finger. Honest tough made at the kitchen table at dawn. Home, he said quietly. The yard agreed. Men set tables under the ash. May brought out pans. Webb drove up with a sack of buttons and a face learning a better way to be. For the account, he said and blushed. A church lady came hat in hand and left a jar of preserves that tasted of surrender. Children ran the fence line, counting calves because the town had decided to love its numbers again. Eliza moved through it steadily, checking pots, setting forks, mending a boy's cuff while he still wore it. She hung the old church card above the porch, the new word facing out so passing weather could learn it. Beloved looked plain and right. Supper began with thanks. They ate beef that had stood the storm, bread that remembered fire, and pie that ended two old arguments and started none. Talk ran easily. Men told how the bonnets had turned hail into small noise. Jess held up his healed arm like proof that stubbornness can be taught manners. Nate told the story of the broken spur until laughter sanded it smooth. When shadows lengthened, the fiddles came out. The first reel knocked dust from boots. The second let a married pair learn their new balance. Caleb did not crowd. Eliza did not hide. They turned as if the floor were an understanding reached at last. Later on the porch, the ledger lay open to a page Eliza had titled in a neat hand, "After the Hail." Columns ran straight as fence boards. She penciled one last line. Losses, 3. Saved, many. Wages paid. Peace owed to all. Caleb leaned on the rail. "You wrote the place into steadiness," he said. "We wrote it together," she answered. "You gave me a door. I kept it oiled." He looked at the ash trees, at the yard that had stood its test, at the small cabin that was now theirs. The way a home is. A promise kept daily. "There's a north pasture that wants a line shack tight before snow," he said. "We'll build it square with a porch that faces storms straight on," she smiled. "I'll sew the curtains last so the wind knows it wasn't invited in." Lights bloomed along the fence. May shooed children toward beds. Jess drifted out to check the horses because habits keep a place honest. Klein tipped his hat and said the county would sleep better than it had yesterday. Even the ridge seemed pleased, giving the stars back like change after a fair trade. Inside the cabin, Eliza set the ash wood last on the table and touched the dent where Clem's knuckles had learned. She put the rawhide ring beside it, then the key, then the pencil. The tools of her life arranged like a small catechism. Caleb came to the door and did not cross until she looked up and nodded. "Partners," he said. "In work," she said. "In name," he said. "In keeping," she finished, and the word meant exactly what they had earned. They banked the stove and stepped outside. Coyotes wrote their thin music in the dark. The calves, bonnetless now, slept without any notion of how close the world had leaned. The ash leaves whispered a line that sounded like scripture. Be kind, be brave, be steady. Years ahead would make room for more repairs and reckonings. Storms would argue. People would too. But the ledger they opened tonight would keep teaching, add the true things, cross out the lies, and write beloved where small men tried to print unfit. Folks say the county changed that week a shade at a time. Boys learned what kind of strength to grow. Girls learned what kind of door to carry in their pocket. And the stone place stood exactly where it had always been, only more itself, which is the best any place can do. This story made history the quiet way, by holding when pushed and by naming rightly what a heart can be for all to see tonight. Like this ending. Follow Shadow Frontier Tales for more clean, gritty, hopeful frontier romances.